Because, I think we need to enlarge the community of people that care about the things we're talking about at this conference, the community of people that care about restoration of our harbor, of the lands adjacent to it, and indeed our city. And my latest contribution to try and help that out is this new website that we launched in January with some funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you very much. Called Mannahatta2409.org, and the subtitle is "Where Do We Go From Here?" And it has this kind of odd name. Mannahatta is referring to the green stuff on the left, which is an idea of what Manhattan might have looked like 400 years ago when Henry Hudson arrived. That's Mannahatta. That's a picture from Manhattan in 2009, so that gives you an idea of what it did look like 400 years from Henry Hudson. And the question of 2409 is, where are we going over the next 400 years? And I think that's not just a decision for the experts to make or for our government leaders to make, even our community leaders to make. I think it's actually something we all need to engage in, and particularly all the people that aren't in the room with us today. And that's really where this 2409 application is trying to go. So let me just show you a couple of slides and try and make this point. So again, here's Mannahatta, there's Manhattan, and sometimes these are treated as sort of bookends, the beginning and the end of history. But in fact, history actually begins today, right? The decisions we're making today are creating the history of the future, the world that our kids and their kids and the next 7 generations will be living into. But these two pictures do allow us to make some very general and very even simplistic comments about how the city has changed over the last 400 years that perhaps give us some ideas about what we could imagine for the future. So for example, the ecosystems of the city have changed. This are the ecosystems of Lower Manhattan as they might have been 400 years ago. And these are the ecosystems of the place today. So we're not used to thinking of buildings and highways and sidewalks as ecosystems in the same way we think of forests or wetlands or estuaries as ecosystems. But in fact, the textbook definition of ecosystem is where the non-living environment and living things come together. And in fact, that applies to this building. The Customs House is an ecosystem in the sense that it's a non-living environment. It's a constructed environment, but there are living things there. That's you and me and our commensals that might be here with us. And that's true for all of the ecosystems of the city. So I think one of the moves is to start thinking about what are the target ecosystem characteristics of the city as a whole. To do that, though, the ecosystems themselves are not enough. You also have to take into account lifestyles and how lifestyles change as people move to urban areas, as they live at higher densities. And I have 3 graphs here from Time NYC. On each of these graphs, the consumption rate or the resource use rate of the average American on a per capita basis is on the left, and the average New Yorker is on the right. So the upper one is water consumption. So you see the average New Yorker uses 74% less water per day than the average American. Electricity consumption is 35% less. New Yorkers actually generate less garbage per person than the average American does. This is the basis of what's called the green metropolis hypothesis. That is the idea that the best thing you could do as an environmentalist is actually move to the city. Maybe move to the city and give up your car. Not necessarily support the Wildlife Conservation Society like where I work, right? Or even to do restoration. But just lower resource use per person can actually create an opportunity for economic growth as well as less resource consumption, which can drive conservation and restoration worldwide. The third thing we have to be thinking about is that the climate continues to change. Here's a picture of Hurricane Sandy, which, as you recall, is a quite large and dramatic storm. And this is a slide that takes out of the New York City Panel on Climate Change report, talking about the climate of the baseline climate, which is considered 1971 to 2000, of course, which is why Philip's presentation this morning was of interest, because there was also a climate that came before 1971. The 2020 climate, the 2050 climate, and the 2080 climate. And these climate changes, we don't know exactly how severe they'll be, but these changes are kind of locked into place already. So imagine a website, an app, an application where you could modify the ecosystems of the city, modify the lifestyle of the people living in the city, and modify the climate, and then see how water, carbon, biodiversity, and population respond. Actually see how the environment responds to different formulations, different ideas, different designs for the city. And then to see those changes in the context of 800 years, if you like, from Mannahatta to today to your vision of the future. If you like, it's rebuild by design for everyone. So that's this mannahatta2409.org. This website's live, it's in beta, you can all do it tonight if you like. When you come to the website, it gives you two options. You can browse existing visions that other people have already submitted, or you can sign in and make your own vision. It's completely free. When you set up your own vision, it asks you to provide a name for your vision. It asks you what year you want to plan for. So you don't have to plan for 2409 if you don't like. You can plan for next year, or 5 years away, or 50 years away. For example, in the conversation about text this morning, we were talking about a 2020 goal and a 2050 goal. It's kind of interesting how you think about how long we should be planning over. And what does that say about the kind of level of imagination, as well as the level of reality you bring to your goal setting. You can write a description of your city, and then ask you which ecosystems do you want to start with. Would you like to start with Mannahatta, or would you like to start with Manhattan today? Right now it just works on Manhattan, but we're in the process of trying to expand it across the rest of the city. So you say click, make vision, and then it brings, there it goes. It brings you to a web map like this, with a series of kind of Photoshop sort of tools on the right side, and then a series of choices here on the left side. You can zoom in and pick a block, or a set of blocks in the city. It's arbitrary what scale you want to work on. Again, this is the sort of choices that we make about restoration, about sites and scale. I picked an internal set of blocks here for this presentation, but you can of course pick some blocks in the estuary or on the edge of the shoreline. And then you fills in a representation of the ecosystems of that block. These are 10 meter by 10 meter cells. The pinks and the purples represent different building types. The yellows and the golds represent different transportation types, sidewalks and streets and avenues in this case. The gray areas are courtyards. You can actually see the little dots are modifiers. That's the subway line going up Broadway. Of course, these ecosystems that you plucked out are in a much larger landscape than ecosystems of the city, which overlays the past ecosystems of the city. So these are the Mannahatta ecosystems, a wetland and forest, and you can see various streams running through. And then these tools over here actually allow you to paint those, to change the ecosystems in a completely free and arbitrary way. Remember, we're not actually changing anything, we're just changing pixels in the computer, but it's a tool set for imagining, for exploration. You can paint single-family homes or office buildings or stadiums. We use a reduced set of classifications that come from the Department of City Planning. You can paint marshes or wetlands or beaches or breakwaters. You can paint different transportation modalities, streets, avenues, pedestrian plazas, bike lanes, light rail lines. You can paint a series of modifiers, the kinds of things that we often talk about in terms of sustainability and resilience, green roofs and photovoltaic panels and cisterns and geothermal pumps. Each one of these ecosystems is characterized by a set of parameters that you see down there at the bottom of the box, and those little eyes take you to the sources of those parameters and eventually to the original reference documents. So in this case, we picked 6 blocks around the Empire State Building. We painted them with green roofs, the top 3 of the blocks. Oops, I was supposed to say over here you can choose the lifestyle. I don't know if you can see that, but there's actually 5 lifestyles. You can have average New Yorkers living in your idea. You can have average Americans. You can have average Earthlings living there. You can have a Lenape person, so the Lenape were the people living here 400 years ago. Or you can have this thing we call eco-hipster. So eco-hipsters, like all of you. Eco-hipsters are young, beautiful people that make conscious decisions about reducing their environmental impact. In our case, they tend more often than average New Yorkers, average Americans to walk or ride their bike or take the subway or ride a bus. They also choose to eat a little less meat and live in a little bit smaller spaces. And they choose to get most of their energy from renewable sources, as we all can do if we just sign up with Con Ed. You can also choose the climate of your vision. You want to have a climate that works with the climate of 400 years ago, the baseline climate of today, or 2020, 2050, 2080. And again, if we were on the edge, you would see a shoreline that's associated with each of those, the 100-year floodline. And then you can pick different precipitation events too, which then result in these metrics of the water model, a carbon model, biodiversity, and population. So water is, rain and precipitation falling on your vision, as well as the indoor water supply, what's coming into that vision to supply human needs in the buildings. It works through an iterative bucket model until it eventually calculates the stormwater flows. So, if I can get the light work here. So this is the water model results. This is the estimated stormwater runoff from that part of the city today. This is the estimated stormwater runoff of 400 years ago, i.e. 0, right? Because it was soil and forest and the water went in the ground. And then this is the vision with the green roofs, which you can see is better than today, but not quite as good as this. Here's the greenhouse gas emissions. You can see there's a slight improvement here. You'll note this is 382 million kilograms of carbon dioxide per year, whereas we're estimating that when it was forest, it was producing about 1.3 million kilograms of carbon dioxide per year. Just to give you an idea of the magnitude of carbon cycle changes in this part of the world. Here's the species diversity of 400 years ago versus today in the vision, and the number of people living there. So the idea is not to tell you what the right answer is. For everybody can interpret these information in their own way. Some people will say, well, we have to have X number of residents and then we'll modify the environment. Other people might say, well, let's look at how do we deal with the stormwater. Moreover, most of the resilience and sustainability dialogue in the city tends to focus on one thing or another thing or another thing, right? So I don't know, Army Corps of Engineers might be thinking about coastal resiliency, the DEP might be thinking about stormwater, the sustainability people at Planet YC might be thinking about carbon emissions, but in fact, this is an ecosystem. It's a landscape of ecosystems that are all interacting with each other and have a variety of different kinds of performances. You can see this in terms of a stock and flux kind of diagram, or a really detailed breakdown. In the end, we calculate about 180 different parameters. And again, it's for 1609, 2010, or 2009, and your vision's performance. Okay. And then when you're done, you can mark your vision public and share it with everybody else. And then it appears in this carousel, so other people can examine your vision and interrogate it. They can then copy it into their workspace and then continue to modify it. So it's also a tool for collaboration as individuals and groups and charrettes as you have it. There's a dialogue, a conversation forum that's associated with it. You can get a link, so you can post your vision to your Facebook page or Google Plus it, or just send it to somebody else. So I'll just end by showing you very quickly two visions that I made, one for Community Board 1 in Lower Manhattan, which I called Greening the Community Board 1 by 2080. And so this shoreline here is showing the 2080 shoreline, the 1,000-year flood line, which I understand is actually a little bit outdated. That's a little conservative even. These are the ecosystems of the city Community Board 1 today. These are the ecosystems of Community Board 1 400 years ago. And here's my vision, which puts a barrier beach along the FDR and salt marshes back behind. So you lost some buildings. This is an opera house, which is remembering, Castle Clinton at one time was an opera house. And it stuck out off of Battery Park before Battery Park filled up and enclosed Castle Clinton again. Whoops, sorry. In the future, it imagines Battery Park City as two islands, which here I've made them all pedestrian islands with a walking bridge across. And which it's a little bit hard to see, but I've made these buildings taller to make up for some of the office space that's been lost here. And then I chose the eco-hipster lifestyle. And so you can see that this vision does quite well in terms of its stormwater performance. It's about 2/3 improvement in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but it's still quite a bit of greenhouse gas emissions. It helps with species diversity, and actually the population density is a little bit higher. The prediction here is of 260,000 jobs in Community Board 1, which is about 10,000 more than are currently in Community Board 1. And it's all quite remarkable. And then finally, here's a vision for 14th Street, Terranova 14th Street, kind of riffing off of some of the things I wrote about in my book last year. But there's 14th Street. There's 14th Street 400 years ago. There it is today. And here's my vision of it, with a streetcar line right down the middle, a light rail line, photovoltaic panels on all the roofs and occasional green buildings, a little bit of modifications in Union Square Park to make it a real forest here. And there's a little bit of there's a tidal energy and a farm over here on the East River side. And this vision, picking eco-hipster, using streetcars as opposed to cars, actually has a 99% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from here to there. Helps you on the species diversity, and again, the residential density is a little bit higher. So these are not visions of the city going away. These are visions of the city working, and certainly the city working better, but also having much better environmental performance. And the idea is to try and make not just me, or not just you, or not just our expert friends and our government officials, but everyone vision makers, people that are envisioning the city, that are creating the city, and then sharing the city using the tools that are available to us, so that we can actually find novel, creative, wonderful solutions to give to the next 400 years. Thank you very much. I can take questions, although I'm not sure how much time I have, but I'm sure somebody will yank me off the stage. Any thoughts? Questions? Comments? Criticisms? What would you do, John?
I have to think.
All right, good.
I will.
I know you will. Yes, please.
I thought it was amazing. I'm really excited to use it, so thank you so much.
Yeah.
Is there any way that you could sort of do it the opposite way around and say, by this year, here are the goals I'd like to see and the outcomes, and then what would the design have to look like to reach those ecosystem, carbon, population goals?
Right. I mean, try and predict some way. Well, it turns out that most of the time there's many ways to meet a goal, right? So I think that's the reason we designed it this way, is so that it's actually moving forward toward what that goal state might be. But I think ultimately what we're trying to figure out is what the goal should be, right? Like we had a presentation this morning about text, and I know that was a long and complicated process to come up with the target ecosystem characteristics that are in the comprehensive habitat restoration plan, which are really great and very interesting. But in some ways, I think society's kind of ceded those decisions to the expert class. And I think what that means is they've also ceded responsibility to them, right? I mean, actually, who in our whole society actually integrates across all these things, decides how population and economy and ecosystem restoration should be balanced with each other? We actually let our politicians do that for us, right? And you know how politicians do it? I mean, they take into account the data and the outcomes, but they also are thinking about, well, how is that going to be the next vote, right? Or how is that going to be elected next? Which might not be the best decision-making process. So what I'm hoping here is actually maybe we can reach some larger consensus across the New York City community about what kind of city we want to have. You know, if 1,000 people go on and make visions for Greenwich Village and 80% of them have more parkland, that becomes a political message about parkland in Greenwich Village. Other thoughts, questions? Please.
You mentioned that you had plans to expand this to other cities in the U.S.
So we're working on expanding it over the rest of New York City, so the other 4 boroughs, which means finishing the historical ecology work as well as extending the models. We also would like, and if anybody has any ideas about this, I don't think our 4 metrics are a complete description of the city. You know, the carbon cycle, the water cycle, biodiversity, and population. I'd really love to do something more about economics, and maybe something about health, and maybe something about social justice. And I just had I hate to say this, but I just had a proposal to NOAA turned down that would have done a coastal flooding amendment or addendum to this. So maybe I'll be able to try and find a way to do that. And so the idea is, the idea in my mind is to make this work really well in New York City. And then once we have this package of things, then we can start moving to other parts of the country and other parts of the world. That's right. It's just hard. I don't know if I'll have the enthusiasm for any study except for my own.
Maybe one more question, Eric?
Yeah.
Last one.
You've created these amazing images of Manhattan 400 years ago.
Yeah.
But it seems, looking at them, there's no animal. Well, I saw one seagull, but it seems like an opportunity to feature the abundance of animals that used to be there.
Yeah.
Consider hunting animals.
Yeah. it's a bald eagle, actually, not a seagull, but that's more of a consequence of the way the camera angle is, when you're so far out. If you look at my book, you'll see other visions, and actually you can play Where's Waldo with them. You can see wolves and bears and other sorts of things. But that's right, in the Manhattan project, and we'll do this for Wilikia, the historical ecology of the rest of the city. There's 1,600 layers describing all the wildlife that used to be here, including people. Thank you very much.